So you see we're travel's going through Europe and we're in the northern Italy city of Milan. It's a big city of 5 million people and they're big into satellite dishes. As you can see all the way out to the horizon, all these satellite dishes. But it's a busy city and it's got wide streets, wide sidewalks, not like the little towns we've been going through. And I'm going to do a little coffee chat this morning from the balcony of this Airbnb that we're staying at. Let me show you the balcony. And this Airbnb that we're staying at easily has one of the biggest balconies you'll ever see. Half of it's covered and half of it's open to the air, and it measures 33 feet long and 15.5 feet wide at its widest point. Even has its own little logo type of tiling. You could easily do outdoor dining right here, and there's entrance from the master bedroom. Has its own water source out here, and it has an entrance from the kitchen. So this is for entertaining for sure, and we're not sure. This might be the penthouse. We're on the 6th floor of this building and there's nothing above us, so this might be the penthouse. Wouldn't hazard to guess what the cost of this particular property would be, but it's nice to stay here as an Airbnb. Turns out that Milan, or Milano in northern Italy, is a fashion capital of Italy, but also a financial center for the whole nation. So we've been to central Italy now with Florence, and now the northern aspect, not far from the French border. We're having breakfast at this very nice little cafe, and they don't speak English very well, but we're having a nice little breakfast here. On our way to the train station for an 8-hour trip into Lyon, France. That place we stayed at for the Airbnb is very similar to that building across the street, where you actually have a doorway that's big enough to drive a car through, and then that doorway leads into, like, see, this van is coming into one of these things, and it actually leads into a center courtyard of this building that's big enough. The courtyard's big enough to have cars parked back there, and then people live in these apartments or Airbnbs or units, whatever you call them. That's the way it's. This is the El Forneo, and there happens to be a El Forneo back home in San Francisco. So this is the little breakfast place that we're having, but actually you can have luncheons here, and there's even dinner here. And look at the size of this van here. It's like a smart car elongated, but how handy would this be if we had this back home? Burns very little gas, and it can haul quite a bit of stuff around town. So this looks like the little van that the El Forneo uses to make little pickups and also perhaps delivery. It's the perfect backdrop for an early morning coffee chat, don't you think? So it's getting hard to figure out where topics are starting on these shooters coffee chats, but it really doesn't matter because all the topics are fun, and we can start these kind of topics anywhere. So there's one that's floating around right now that I believe is started by Loads of Bacon, and that is, how did you get started in casting? So I'd like to do a coffee chat this morning on a story about how I got my first slab of lead. And what happened was I was doing a summer job right after I graduated from high school. And this summer job was working for a company that was involved in doing some engineering research. I was hired on to be kind of more or less a summer job, kind of like a general all-around flunky. Just do this, do that, clean here, clean there, fix this, fix that. So I got a big education there on how working for a company was that year, that summer. And what the boss did was had us do all these kind of jobs where we were also delivering things and bringing things into the company. So we drove around a little bit too. And the boss actually had me and this other flunky guy that was doing these odd jobs for the company he had us wash and detail his car every Friday afternoon. Don't get me wrong, he was a good boss. So we would do this and made his car spick and span for the weekend. And while he said, while we're doing that, go ahead and wash your own cars too. So what we did was, after we washed the boss's car and we parked it, then we brought our cars in and we washed our cars. Didn't detail them quite as well, but we washed them nicely, and then we washed my partner's car too. Well, right next to where we washed the cars was this kind of a garbage refuse dump. They just kind of threw stuff, and then some truck came and took it all away. Well, one week I saw on this refuse pile this slab of lead, this little slab of lead. It's about a foot by maybe 8 or 9 inches, so it's kind of like that, and it was about 2 inches thick. And this thing had a hole in the center of it that went clear through, and there was some aluminum foil that was covering part of it. But I could tell it was lead because what I had been doing was, for the last couple of years before that, I was reading up on shooting and reloading and casting and all that kind of thing. I was doing a lot of reading. It all started by buying an issue of Gun Digest a couple of years previous. So I knew what lead looked like, and in fact this lead, I identified it quickly because it had the color of lead and it had some dents and damages in it that showed that it was malleable, so it wasn't a real hard slab, it was lead. And so after I washed my car, since it was in the refuse pile, I figured, hey, why not? I had my trunk open, I walked over to the refuse pile and picked this thing up, and sure enough, it was heavy. So that was the last thing I needed to know, it was lead. And I put it in my trunk, and I had that for a long time, even before I did any casting. I knew I was going to be doing some casting, so that made a good lead source. Well, the problem was that when I started casting, I had this cast iron pot and a ladle that I was going to do some casting, but the big slab of lead wouldn't fit in that melting pot, so I had to figure out some way to make it into smaller parts. Well, I figured that if I used a torch and tried to melt it, that was just going to take too much gas, and gas is still expensive, so that wasn't a good way to do it. Tried to hacksaw it, and the hacksaw would clog up, and that wasn't working. So I resorted to using a hammer and chisel. And so by a lot of careful, tedious chiseling, I cut that slab into smaller pieces that would fit into the casting pot. And that's my first experience with melting lead. And I had to get some tin because it was pretty soft lead, and I knew I wanted to have hard bullets. So at the time, we didn't know much about antimony, but we knew about tin. And tin would harden the lead, but also help it flow. And so I got my tin from going to plumber's supply shops. There was a big one in Oakland, near Chinatown. And I walked in there, that's where I bought my casting pot. And also, they had a cardboard box full of these little, they're skinny, but they're little bars of 50-50 solder, plumber's solder. And the plumbers use a lot of that. But I just bought the whole box. They were like something like 75 cents for one of these little thin bars that were kind of long. They must have been like over a foot long, each one. So I bought the whole box, and that lasted me for a long time. I had a good source of tin there because that was 50-50 solder. It was 50-50 bar solder is what it was called. And that's how I got started doing my casting. So that's my shooter chat for the morning. Hello to all of you out there from Milan, Italy. We're on our way to Lyon, France today. So bye for now.